Welcome to Thistles and Rainbows. Today I'm excited to introduce a new embroidery pattern. This pattern is perfect for beginners. If you've never done embroidery before but you've been wanting to learn, then this pattern is perfect for you. I'm calling it the Boho Rainbow pattern, and we're going to walk through how to do 10 basic embroidery stitches that will give you a great foundation for doing all kinds of embroidery. The cool thing about this pattern is that not only are you learning basic embroidery, but you're also making a beautiful wall hanging that you can put on display somewhere in your home to show off all of your hard work. Let's get started. Let's start out our rainbow with a running stitch. This stitch follows along the dashed lines at the top of the rainbow, coming up through the back, covering the entire dash, and going back down on the other end of it. Once you've completed your entire row of running stitches, you'll need to secure your thread at the back of your hoop. Slide your needle under your last stitch to create a small loop. Then pull your needle through the loop and make a small knot. Then grab your scissors and trim your thread. The second stitch in our rainbow is called the back stitch. The back stitch starts out the same as the running stitch, up through the back and completely covering the dash. But we're going to use the little dots as our guide to know where to start and stop each stitch. For the first back stitch, you're going up from the back, covering the dash, and going down through dot number 1. For all of the other stitches, you'll be skipping to the next dot. Start by coming up through the back and pulling your thread all the way through. Then you will go backwards to the previous dot and put your needle through the hole that you came up through previously. This connects the lines, making one continuous line. It's time to tie off your thread. Go to the back of your hoop and slide your needle under your last stitch, making a small loop. Then slide your needle through the loop, creating a knot. Pull the knot until it secures your thread to the back and trim it with your scissors. Our third stitch is called the chain stitch. Start by going up through the back of the fabric, just like the other previous stitches. Then bring your needle right back down through the same hole you came up through, making a little loop with your thread that is just slightly larger than the first chain link printed on your fabric. Next, bring your needle up through the back of the fabric at the top middle of the first chain. Be sure that your needle comes up through the center of your loop thread. Now gently tug until the loop is about the size of the chain printed on your fabric. Next, make another little loop and bring your needle back down through the previous hole inside of the top of your first loop. Continue to follow this pattern, linking each chain together to create one continuous chain stitch. When you get to the end of your row of chain stitches, you'll need to finish off the last link by securing a small stitch over the top of the last chain. Always remember to tie off your thread on the back and secure it with a little knot so that your stitches don't come unraveled. Our fourth stitch is called the stem stitch. This stitch starts out just like the running stitch. Come up through the back of the first dot and bring your needle down through dot number 2. Create a loop with your thread on the left and then come up through the middle of the dashed line on the right side of your thread. Now pull your stitch secure and bring your needle down through the third dot. Create another loop on the left side and bring your needle up through the center of the dashed line and pull gently until the stitch meets the fabric. Continue the same pattern until you finish your row of stitches. This stitch is perfect for creating stems on flowers. For the last stitch, simply secure it down at the end of the row and don't forget to turn your hoop over to tie off your thread on the back. The last part of our rainbow actually combines 2 stitches, the back stitch, which you've already learned, and the lazy daisy stitch. We're going to start out with the back stitch, creating a curve for our lazy daisies to attach to. This time we're going to start on the right side of our rainbow. Follow along with me as we practice our back stitch, coming up through the back and connecting our line by coming down through each of the previous holes. The lazy daisy stitch starts in a similar way to the chain stitch. Come up through the back of your fabric and then bring your needle down through the same hole that you came up through, creating a small loop just slightly bigger than the loop that is printed on your fabric. Bring your needle up through the center of the loop at the very top of your lazy daisy petal. Now secure your lazy daisy stitch down with a small stitch just above the top of your loop. Continue to repeat the same pattern until all of your lazy daisy petals are complete. And as always, tie off your stitches on the back of your hoop. Now that our rainbow is complete, we can start on these beautiful cascading flowers. Our first flower is going to use the satin stitch. This stitch comes in handy for filling in large spaces and is basically a bunch of straight stitches right next to each other. For the satin stitch, come up through the back at the top of one of your petals and down at the bottom of your petal. I like to start out in the center and then move out to each side of my petal, making one stitch on either side to use as a guide. Then I just fill in all of the white spaces, making sure that each stitch touches another stitch to completely cover the white spaces. And I use the petal shape as my guide for where to start and end my stitches. As you can see on the side of each petal, your stitches will get a little bit shorter because you're following the curve of the petals. Because the petals are smaller on the bottom, some of your satin stitches may slightly overlap. Once you complete the first petal, move on to the next one until all of your petals are filled in. Let's talk about what to do if you run out of thread and you haven't finished your flower yet. It's really simple. You just tie it off on the back like you would if you were starting a new color, rethread your needle with the same color, and then pick up where you left off. French knots are perfect to use in the center of flowers. You can use one French knot for the center of a small flower or a cluster of them for a larger one. To make a French knot, come up through the back of your fabric. Hold the base of the needle in your right hand, and with your left hand, wrap your thread around your needle twice. Next, put the point of your needle right next to the hole you came up through. With your left hand, gently tug the thread so that the thread slides down to the bottom of the needle, touching the fabric. And then with your right hand, push the needle through, gently pulling the thread until it forms a little knot. For this flower, we're going to make a cluster of 6 French knots in the center. No need to worry if the back of your design is starting to look a bit messy. Just tie it off and let's move on to the next flower. The woven wheel stitch is probably my favorite. It makes such a beautiful embroidered rose. We're going to start by creating 5 spokes in the shape of a wheel using straight stitches, starting with the outer edge and moving into the very center for each stitch. Once you've completed your 5 spokes, come up from the back between 2 of the spokes close to the center of your circle. To create our woven wheel, we are going to weave our needle over one spoke and under the next. Over and under. Over and under. Over and under. Repeat this pattern all the way around and you'll notice a beautiful rose begins to emerge. Be careful not to pull your thread too tight, and watch that your needle doesn't get caught on your rainbow or on your other stitches surrounding your woven wheel. You'll know that you're getting close to the end of your woven wheel when you can't see your spokes anymore. Once you get to that point, simply push your needle through slightly under the edge of your woven wheel and tie off your thread on the back. For the leaf stitch, use the center line as your guide to make a straight stitch from the top point of your leaf, covering the line, to about the halfway point of your leaf. Now, using the leaf outline as your guide, start on the right side of your leaf and bring your needle up through the back, slightly to the right of your center line and just below the top point of your leaf. Make a diagonal stitch down just under the center line of your leaf. Now move over to the left side and do the same thing. Each time you will move slightly farther down the leaf, alternating from right to left until you complete your leaf. Tie off your leaf and trim your thread on the back. We already used the Lazy Daisy stitch on the bottom of our rainbow, but here we're going to use it again to make a cluster of daisy flowers. Bring your needle up from the back of your fabric at the bottom of one of your daisy petals. Now make a small loop and bring your needle back down through the same hole you came up through. Hold the loop in place and bring your needle up again at the top center of your daisy petal. Make sure to pull your thread through the center of your loop. Now tack down your stitch just over the top of your loop to hold your daisy petal securely in place. Repeat the same stitch on each petal until you've completed all 3 of your daisies. Let's get a close-up view. Once you've completed all 3 of your daisy flowers, tie off your thread on the back and let's add some French knots. Our woven wheel with French knots in the middle is very similar to the woven wheel without French knots. We are still going to use straight stitches to create 5 spokes on our wheel that we can use to weave the thread around to create our embroidered rows. Once you have stitched your 5 spokes, bring your needle up through your fabric in the center of 2 of the spokes right next to your cluster of French knots. Now start to weave your thread over one spoke and under the next, continuing the pattern all the way around your woven wheel until you have covered all of the spokes. Finish your woven rows with a stitch just slightly under the side and then tie it off on the back. Add a couple of leaves using the same leaf stitch we learned earlier in this video. Now create 2 clusters of French knots, starting with 1 French knot in the center and working your way around the center knot so that each cluster looks like an individual flower. We actually have already used variations of the straight stitch in our running stitch and on the spokes of our woven wheel. But you can also use straight stitches to make a simple flower. Just make sure that each of your stitches meets together in the center. Because these flowers are so small, we are going to use French knots with only 1 loop around the needle in the center of each of our little blue flowers. For our final flower, we're going to use the satin stitch again. A good trick is to start your satin stitch in the middle, creating a straight line that you can use as a guide for all of your other stitches. Because the petals are curved, you will be angling your side stitches slightly towards the center and filling them in so that the entire petal is covered. Your stitches on the sides of the petal will be slightly shorter than the ones in the middle. Let's finish off our pattern with 4 French knots using 2 loops once again. Tie off your final thread and let's get ready to see your completed design. This Boho Floral Rainbow pattern is traced onto the fabric using heat erasable ink. Once your pattern is complete, grab your blow dryer or a small iron and watch as the ink disappears, leaving behind your beautiful hand-stitched floral rainbow. In your beginning embroidery kit, you will find a white circle made of cardstock. This circle fits perfectly inside of the back of your hoop, covering the messiness of your stitches. To finish off your embroidery design, let's use a running stitch around the entire perimeter of the excess fabric. Choose any color from your leftover thread. Your stitches do not have to be perfect. You can actually weave your needle in and out, gathering several stitches at the same time, and then pull your thread all the way through. Continue until you have created a running stitch around the entire circle of fabric. Now pull both ends of the thread and gather the excess fabric around the back of the hoop. Double knot your thread to keep it secure. Your kit comes with a piece of twine to use as a hanger for your completed wall hanging. Fold the twine in half and loop it through the top of your embroidery hoop. Then tie it off on top and admire your beautiful work. If you love this kit and are interested in purchasing this pattern or other embroidery designs, you can find me at Thistles and Rainbows on Instagram or Facebook, or check out my shop on Etsy.